people are more connected than they've ever been before, and that only is increasing. And so what we try to do and what we think a lot about is, how do you give today's change makers a reason to share and make it easy to do so? Because without that prompt, it's harder to break through that noise. And I think that's one of the best ways to get those next generation of modern change makers involved. And then it kind of comes back to the human element at the end of the day. It's about building relationships and investing in people and understanding their goals and desires. And it's not too different from anyone of any age in terms of connecting, but that's one of the ways I think you can think about and involving and engaging those under 40, under 50 audiences in your organization and your mission.
Have you ever noticed that some of the best ideas come from unexpected places? Your next breakthrough may come from a leader facing similar challenges, but in a completely different sector. Welcome to Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop. Join us as we explore how today's successful leaders inspire, influence, and connect with others. Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver and the Communications Board, who have teamed up to spotlight how great leaders and communicators are making their impact in the world. This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. As a proud GW graduate myself, I can attest that faculty members combine academic rigor with real-world lessons that can't always be found in textbooks. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. I am thrilled to introduce today's guest, someone I've known for a long time and really admire, Max Friedman. Max is the CEO and co-founder of Givebutter, an all-in-one nonprofit fundraising and CRM platform. To date, Givebutter has powered almost $2 billion in donations for millions of change makers and thousands of nonprofits. Here are 3 things I think you should know about Max. Number 1, he got his start at my alma mater, the George Washington University, where he and his team were finalists for the New Venture competition. Number 2, Max is a self-taught programmer. He and his co-founders built the first version of the product back in 2016 in their college dorm. One of those traditional startup stories we've heard. And number 3, Max believes in the power of business to create good in the world. He and his team set out to make online giving fun, social, and transparent. The name Givebutter represents giving better through donating, fundraising, volunteering, and advocacy. He's been recognized for his work in social impact. For example, Forbes named him to their 30 under 30 list. Max, you have been called a leader in social entrepreneurship, a modern day CEO, and even in an article 10 years ago, the next Mark Zuckerberg. Today, we are thrilled to call you a chief influencer. Welcome.
Thanks, Anthony. Super happy to be here.
Well, it has been really incredible to watch your journey. I am very proud of you. And, I remember how you got started because I knew you way back when you were an impressive college student and you were working on this business in your dorm room. But for everyone else, why did you start Givebutter?
Yeah, well, in no small part, thanks to great mentors like yourself, had gave me the inspiration and the confidence that I could go start my own business. But before our alum days at GW, I grew up in a small town in a small state, New Hampshire. And I was very fortunate that I had parents who taught me important values like working hard and doing your best and, little things like doing the right thing by others. And one of those that when I look back on my life that I didn't appreciate as much as I do now was the Jewish value of tikkun olam. And so all through childhood growing up, we would volunteer and we'd donate and give back to causes. And when I got to college, I did a lot of fundraising. And one of those was the Movember Foundation, which Anthony, you were an early supporter of for men's health causes. Grew a mustache every year in November. Another one, George Washington University Stance Marathon for the DC area Children's Miracle Network hospitals, and a bunch of others. And something that I noticed through this fundraising that I was doing was there's so many people. In fact, I believe everybody fundamentally as human beings wants to make the world a better place, but there are barriers to doing so. There's friction. And sometimes that's little things like inspiration or resources. But what we noticed, and as a lover of technology and someone who played video games my whole life and learned how to code early in college, I saw what if we made the fundraising aspect easier because I was doing a lot of it. And a lot of those tools were big charities who had peer-to-peer fundraising for their individual fundraisers to be able to get involved. But what if we gave this to everybody? What if everybody could be a change maker? And so it started with that kernel of an idea. And it's been so amazing how over the last, we just celebrated our 8th anniversary of Givebutter's founding. And it's just been really cool to see how the platform's evolved over that time.
Well, from the outside, it's been incredible to see how it's evolved because, like you said, I can remember when you were part of Movember and doing fundraising, and you saw the opportunity to help folks, who were raising a few $100, at a really small scale. But now you're working with nonprofit organizations that are raising a lot more than that. And so, can you talk about that transition?
Yeah, absolutely. In the early days, students were our first users. There was a lot of students fundraising for charities. And I was a college student, and so it was a very natural place to start. And we had a butter ambassador program where we called it spreading the butter on college campuses. And it was a lot of fun and it got us going. But as we graduated, as many of our first users graduated, and they were fundraising for all different kinds of charities, we started working more with the nonprofits themselves. And that opened us up to a very wide breadth of amazing organizations doing great work of all shapes and sizes. And that transition was really fun for us because those nonprofits in many ways were excited to talk to us because we were engaging a younger generation of donors in philanthropy. And as we've grown and we've built more tools and technology, we've been able to, we think, bridge that gap of, hey, how do we do both give great tools to change makers to change the world, which is why we started, but also be that kind of next generation of fundraising tools and technology to help those nonprofits make the world a better place. And yeah, it's really it's one of those, like, $1 billion donated. I mean, when we started, it was something that was a dream. And so now we continue to raise the bar, and we actually moved to say, over the lifetime of Givebutter, we want to power the next 1 billion change makers and actually focus on that core idea of, like, how do we impact 1 billion people's lives?
That's amazing. You sort of touched on this, but I want to ask about, a lot of nonprofits that depended on direct mail and paper checks have struggled to adapt to a new environment. And I wonder what lessons you have for them.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what's so exciting about the world we are in today is that it's very different from where it was 8 years ago when we started. So in what happened in between then, COVID changed everything. I think when we were getting going, it was very commonplace, direct mail, offline giving. There was a lot of talk around the donors aging. And certainly that's still a part of the story. But, when I'll never forget my birthday in April, right after COVID, and I'm on Zoom with all my grandparents who are all 80 years or older for my birthday, many of whom barely used a computer before that. And so it was this shift to technology that I think there's sort of two buckets I see. There's nonprofits who have not tried to adapt, and I think that that's no longer an excuse. The idea that donors don't want to use technology or embrace different ways of giving. I think we have moved beyond that. And to that cohort, I would say it's like a seek discomfort thing, embrace change, and I think that there's so much opportunity on the other side of that. For those who have tried and have struggled to adapt, I feel that pain because it's noisy and there's a lot of options. And I think that one of the things that we try to do at Givebutter is to cut through the noise and provide as many tools as we can in one platform and build a central place for you to get inspired and see best practices and be connected to resources to solve different problems in a modern age of giving. And so it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, but what we try to do is just expose best practices to everybody and not just, in the hands of some very large charities who have been doing it for a long time. How do we innovate? How do we continue to adapt for everybody to build a better world?
Yeah, when you think about getting people to participate, to give, to get involved, obviously that requires influence, right? Organizations and their ambassadors, the people who represent them, have to influence others. And when we think about how do you influence that next generation, I mean, we're not just talking about college students or even people in their 20s, literally donors under 40 or 50. How are they different from last generation's donor? And how do you make giving fun? How do you make
Yeah.
getting involved fun? Because I know that's something that you all are really focused on.
Yes. We like to say puns are fun. That's where our name came from. And giving should be fun too. And you mentioned this in the intro, but that's where the name, it's like, how do we build a better way to give, a more fun way to give? And when giving's fun, you want to do it again. And a big part of it is how do we do that? So one of the places that I would start thinking about today's change makers is thinking about how we're in a world where they're more connected than ever. People are more connected than they've ever been before, and that only is increasing. And so what we try to do and what we think a lot about is how do you give today's change makers a reason to share and make it easy to do so? Because you have all these, it's like we're in this world of micro influencers. Everybody has a community around them, and it's more, people are living in more places, they're more spread out than ever before. And so uh, how do you give those micro influencers and connect with them and give them a reason to share and make it easy to do so? And so one of the ways that a lot of people do this is through peer-to-peer fundraising. And that's where I got my start. Was I was running November campaigns, and I was sending this to everyone in my orbit. And I got a lot of people involved with men's health causes who otherwise may have not had that connection, but they gave because they knew me, they knew I was passionate about the cause. And many of those people went on and grew mustaches and started raising money themselves. And so it's one of those ways that giving me that opportunity and making it easy for me to share my love of this cause with other people, inspired a lot of other people to donate and get involved too. The other thing that I would say is, there's a lot of little things that I think can help enable, whether, not everyone can get celebrity involvement or local news, but thinking about how do you create a sort of exciting element to a campaign or an event, I think can go a really long way to pull people in. And so it's one of those sort of getting out of your comfort zone types of things. But one of the most successful strategies that we've seen at Givebutter is running once or twice a year some kind of annual or differentiated event that connects to your cause in some way, and focusing on that as a rallying cry to get those micro influencers involved with your organization and giving them that opportunity to share your mission. Because without that prompt from you and from them, it's harder to break through that noise. And I think that's one of the best ways to get the sort of next generation of modern change makers involved. And then it kind of comes back to the human element at the end of the day. It's about building relationships and investing in people and understanding their goals and desires. And it's not too different from anyone of any age in terms of connecting, but that's one of the ways I think you can think about and involving and engaging those under 40, under 50 audiences in your organization, in your mission.
Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit more about that because one of the mantras I've been using a lot this year is faces are the new logos. I think that brands can't just show up as a logo, they really have to personalize it, connect authentically. And one of the ways they can do that is through their people. And that's, one of the things that is a thread for chief influencer. And so when I think about your advice to brands about micro influencers and the way that they can get people to represent them, I just wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, because one of the things that, I've experienced, as you described as peer-to-peer fundraising, is something that works really well. If somebody you know and like and trust asks you to support something, you want to support it. And I've been in the seat where I've supported somebody for an organization that, frankly, is just not my focus as an organization. And then suddenly the organization is sending me a lot of paper mail. And I'm like, oh, I really wish they wouldn't waste their money on that, because I'm not really that's not really my main cause. It's kind of like my friend wants me to support their walk, but now I feel like they're spending all that money mailing me. Sometimes it's a lot of stuff, it's like a lot of labels and books. And you wouldn't believe how much. And so I wonder what advice you have for organizations that want to leverage peer-to-peer fundraising, and they want to get micro influencers involved and build up their own influencers. But then how do you maintain those relationships through those people so that you don't have that experience that's like, hey, I'm now getting all these things in the mail that I don't really want for you because I gave to Max,
Right. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I guess I'd ask you, did any of those organizations pick up the phone, give you a call?
No way.
Yeah. I'd try that. It's not going to work for everybody, but it's like, let's build a real human connection.
Yeah.
Like you said, you gave through a friend or a connection in your community. Sending you a piece of mail or an email, it's hard to build that, and it's an investment. It's an upfront investment, and I don't have the data off the top of my head, but there's a lot of stats that show calling a donor and getting them to respond within the first 24 hours of making a gift exponentially increases the likelihood that they'll give again. And so that's something that I think a lot about. Is it's a little thing, but it's like, how do you go back to the human relationship component of this? And certainly a huge part of that is the fact that you gave because of this person that you know. And so how do you continue to equip that person that in involving you in the organization, work through that person and leverage that relationship to bring you closer and closer to the cause? Because that's something that I think can easily get lost. You end up in a donor database somewhere, and there's a staffer who's responsible for engaging that list and and connecting those dots and bringing that closer together, and why you ended up donating in the first place, and trying to do both of those things in tandem, I think can be really powerful.
Yeah, that's such a great point. It makes me think of both my undergraduate alma mater as well as William Jewell, which as well as my graduate alma mater, GW. They both do something that really did what you described, which is they use students to phone bank, and they call you and they update your address and they ask you what's going on, but tell you what's happening. But then of course they use that to ask, and those are the types of calls that I, and I'm sure many people like me, do take, because you do want that connection to a real person, and it's an active student who's benefiting. But a lot of the legacy nonprofit organizations that I might give, they don't necessarily do that. So I think that's really good advice, to find those personal ways that an organization can then continue to deepen that connection outside of whoever brought you in the first place.
Yeah, even if it's just a thank you. Thank you. And, you don't pick up the phone, but it's a voicemail. It's short, sweet. Voicemails on iPhones are getting transcribed.
Yeah.
Like, you can see it. You don't even need to, it's just like, wow, they called me. I just gave, today or yesterday, and I'm getting it. Like, and then hopefully that plants the seed to then build a real relationship over time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really good advice. I think a lot of people think of calling for the ask and not necessarily calling for the thanks.
Yeah.
And when you're calling for the thanks, you're just saying thanks. You're not asking them for anything. And so that then you're giving to them rather than asking, which of course is your specialty at Givebutter. So it makes sense that you would have that great advice. Okay, so I want to switch gears here for a second. You have a fast growing company. You have, I think, is it about 70 employees right now? And you have a fully remote team. Now, some leaders just don't believe it's possible to maintain a strong culture without a physical office. And they're trying to figure out how to get people back into the office, or how many days a week they need to require that. And they'll just say, you just can't have a great culture. You just really can't have that identity and be at your best if you don't have people all together. And then I look at a company like yours that's very successful, and in a little bit we'll talk about some of your more recent milestones that are very exciting. And you have a different philosophy. So I wonder if you could talk about that, because I think that all kinds of leaders could probably learn, not just from the next generation of fundraising, but from the next generation of leadership, of what the future of an office environment or non-office environment, what the future of work is.
So we were remote before it was cool back in 2019. And we may have just been 5 people at the time, but we built a very intentional remote first culture. And it all starts with this handbook that we made. I don't think many people think of handbooks as an important part of the company culture, or especially at a startup when you're just a couple of people and it's usually an implicit agreement about how we're all going to work together. But for us, being remote, it became the cornerstone of everything that we do. And it all starts with our mission, our vision, our values. Those values transcend the rituals of our company. When we get together, why do we get together, how often we do it, and we integrate those values throughout. And I can explain more in a second. Then there's the guidelines that sort of is the agreement between how we all will work together. How do we operate? How do we communicate? Things like leading with kindness. And we have a joke in there. I wrote, we believe in the Oxford comma. And so it's a little bit in some ways specific, but it's also, I think, indicative of the type of explicit communication that we're trying to encourage. And then the last thing is the policies. So this is like what you typically think of, I think, in a handbook, which is like, what's the fine print? How do our benefits work? But we try to write everything in a very user-friendly way where people can understand what it is that we are all doing here. What is the mission? What is the vision of the values? What are the rituals? What are the guidelines for how we communicate? And then what are the benefits and how do they work in terms of how I actually work at this company? And this handbook we made public, and actually employees can see it before they ever even join the company. And then the last stage of our interview process, we call a values interview. And that is a committee style panel interview with a set of questions specifically aimed at our values. And another thing that we did differently is that a lot of people will sort of front load some of those questions in the recruiter screen part of the process. But generally, we find that those are soft screened throughout. We're sort of always kind of filtering to an extent your values. But when you get to the end, this is sort of a collective panel that's saying, is this person, our 3 values are be awesome, be butter, and be change makers. Those are a little bit vague, but we've made them more specific and refined them over time because you're getting a group of people who represent different departments in the company to basically say, does this person meet this value or not? And so you're kind of constantly building up, what does this value mean in our company? And I sort of found that most values in most companies generally boil down to the same 3 things. It's be excellent, be a good person that's authentic and, kind and, themselves. And then be a change maker for us was more to the mission, which is when you see something in the world, you do something about it. And it doesn't have to be charitable in nature. It's just, I see a problem and I'm proactively going about and solving it. And so we have situational questions aimed at each one. And then once they join, they're part of our weekly all hands. We have a breadwinners channel in Slack where we shout out folks who are representing our values. And then we publicly call them out at our weekly all hands. They're part of our performance reviews. And how is this person meeting these values or not? And how can we coach them up? And obviously, like I said, they're part of our interviews. And so these things have become so important to our remote culture to basically say, here's the set of expectations for all of us. And it enables us to show up as our best selves, doing our best work, because we've done such a intentional job, I think, of front loading the work. I think it's not a reactive sort of, here's how we're going to be. We've front loaded the effort on what are we all agreeing to in this remote first world. And I think that's made a huge difference downstream of building a great culture that people love. And that will look different for every company, but I think it all starts with that handbook.
I don't know what's more controversial, your idea that, you can be a remote first company, have a great culture, or the use of the Oxford comma. That's very controversial. With
Vampire Weekend has a song, Oxford comma, and would probably say it's the Oxford comma. It's the more controversial statement.
Yes, lots of, especially former journalists like we, because we got that trained out of us. What do you say? So, okay, there are probably leaders that say, look, we have a clear vision. We have clear values. Mm-hmm. But I used to be able to observe walking around the office, if somebody seemed stressed or if somebody was really doing a good job of coaching their team member, for me to get a sense that they're a really good manager. In fact, back in, I think it was the 70s, this term was coined, management by walking around. This whole idea that, there's something to the observation. And that was some people's style of management, and they don't have that tool anymore. So what would you say if they say, well, I have a lot of those things that you described, Max, but we still feel like we're missing something?
So I've hired more people than I can count who I've never met in person at this point. And I think that there are things that you don't know. I don't know how tall people are. That's certainly one. But I do think that there is generally an overestimation about the importance of interviewing someone in person to gauge. In fact, in some ways, I think it removes bias. I think it removes an element of scrutiny over different working styles, different ways people operate. And I do think remote work caters to a certain type of person who values flexibility and autonomy in their lives. And I think that the interviews and cultures that struggle is when they try to fight that rather than embrace it. And I do think one of the questions we sort of look for and try to understand is someone's experiencing comfort level working remotely, because it is different. And so we've had people who turn over simply because they decided they don't actually want to work remotely. Well, if you can figure that out sooner, that's a good thing as an employer, because you want to make sure that we're aligned here and that this is a long-term fit. And so it's hard because we don't want to necessarily make assumptions, but I do think that there are important questions you can get at to sort of see, hey, is this someone who's and less than about this person a good fit for remote work, and more about, is your company willing to embrace the realities of remote work, or your organization, to make that work for both of you. And I think that sometimes it's a square peg round hole issue where the agreement is not clear. Someone thinks that they're going to have a little more flexibility in their days, but actually they have to be at their desk all day from 9 to 5, when remote work does give you a level of flexibility that you may not actually need to be physically in your seat. So I think that that's where I see a lot of those challenges coming into play, is sort of trying to fit an in-person culture or experience into a remote environment, when I think some of it needs to be rethought. And then I also think it helps when you have those upfront like sort of alignment, where we lean in our handbook to help us do some of that as well.
Can you talk a little bit from a leadership perspective, maybe you, other members of the leadership team, you don't have the ability to connect with your team, at the water cooler, of course, is the phrase we all use for the old days. But I know you've developed other ways that you connect with the team beyond these foundational documents that you describe, so that, you get to know each other and they know where you're headed and all of that kind of stuff. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a couple ways we do it. So we use Slack as kind of our replacement for an office. Teams and other products do a similar thing. We have channels in Slack for pets and plants, we have an I made this channel where I can't even believe the stuff that I see in there of people rebuilding cars from the ground up, and sheds and all sorts of amazing things, knitting sweaters, and that's an amazing way that our team connects culturally, is just through topical channels that we have parents channel, and people are sharing photos of the kids. And that's a really, I think, nice way to replace some of that. The other thing that we do for live interactions is that we have something called Toast Time once a week, which is a bread butter pun for us, but for others, it's basically a 30-minute water cooler. It's a standing meeting every week where people can just join for 30 minutes and just connect. And our head of people leads them, and sometimes there's topics. We sometimes use them to bring in a speaker or someone to engage the group in some topical discussion, but most of the time it's just time to get together and have a free-flowing conversation. We're small enough where that works, but I think at a certain size you can also do breakout rooms and have smaller groups and randomize it a bit. The other thing is that we've been very intentional with our all hands meetings, where we do them once a week, and we focus on the more important cultural soft stuff than treating them as a reporting oriented meeting. One thing we realized with remote work is that most things can happen asynchronously, meaning that you don't need to be having a live conversation to get work done. But that doesn't mean have no meetings. I think there's still value to having regular recurring meetings that are oriented around building relationships. And so in those meetings, we do things like customer spotlights and the breadwinners that I mentioned earlier. We have this ritual where we do the days of the week. So today we had our all hands. It was like Lost Socks Day. Apparently today is in honor of people who lose their socks. And so it's just like sort of silly things that build up like inside jokes and some culture that you might otherwise get from some in-person interactions. And then if we end early, we actually just leave it open, and similar to Toast Time, people can just catch up and chat and have sort of an open-ended conversation. And so I think there are little things like that you can sprinkle in to help build some of those water cooler style relationships with your team.
And then outside of Slack, do you see external social media like Instagram or LinkedIn as being important tools for you to communicate, whether it's internally with people who are, team members, or externally with other partners?
So we have a private Facebook group we call the Givebutter fam. And that has been an awesome resource for our community to engage with each other. And we love leveraging that to pull our audience to ask or share teasers of upcoming features and webinars and things that we're doing before anybody else gets to see them. And that's been really nice to build that closer relationship at scale with our customers and partners. The other thing that we've been doing is as we've grown, we've started to find other pockets of Changemakers where we could be a sponsor and get involved in a one-to-many basis. And that's been really fun. So we're the title sponsors of the Nonprofit Marketing Summit. And it's been so cool because we couldn't spend enough money to get in front of 20,000 nonprofits at the same time. It doesn't exist, but the Nonprofit Marketing Summit is doing that virtually at scale. And so virtual events are just amazing opportunities to engage people without ever having, it's similar to remote work. It's like this ability to connect with people all over the world. And leaning into that rather than fighting it, I think is such a big opportunity with events. So, we're finding different ways to be creative about doing that as well and doing that. So social media definitely is actually something that we've had trouble cracking. We're thought of as like a modern, younger generation of fundraising tools, but I think B2B social media is very hard, having a recurring and strong presence. And so one of the things we've tried to think about doing is similar, leaning into the platform. Like these platforms are built to be entertaining. And so posting content that's very, I think, just sort of a status update. Here's what we're doing. It's hard to break through the noise that way. And so finding ways to build more entertaining content and things like that to connect with our community and our team is also, I think, going to be really important to stand out.
Yeah. I'd love to ask your thoughts on brand. I mean, you're not someone who, correct me if I'm wrong, you didn't study like marketing or brand as your sort of focus in school. And yet it seems to me that you have a strong knack, for branding. And if you think about the number of even puns that, you've shared about toast time, spread the butter, give better, give butter, all of these things. Could you talk about, in today's environment, the importance of brand and the type of brand that you've developed for both internal and external purposes to break through the noise and connect with people? Because it seems like, you might have sort of a philosophy around that. But I know it's not something you studied formally.
Yeah, that's right. I was a finance and computer science double major, and I definitely never thought of myself as like a branding, marketing person. And so it's been fun. I mean, when we started Givebutter, the name, I just remember my dad was so supportive, but also so confused. Like, what is this name? And it's been cool to see it just become a little bit more like socially accepted. Like Givebutter is more of a known thing and people accept that. But in the early days, it's hard. And one of the reasons why we did that was because we believed in the principle of when you're an underdog, particularly, and you got to find your competitive advantage. We used to joke that no other fundraising platform that we knew of had a mascot. And so we wanted to create a mascot. And then the joke became, well, who knew butter was a mascot? But we turned it into one. We have this little, if you're watching the video recording, I have Mr. Butter. This is the original Mr. Butter on my shirt here. And he's gotten a facelift recently. But that was really important to create personality in our brand, something that we stood for that was fun and lighthearted and evoked a sense of, for us, it sounds sort of silly, but it was like ease of use has become such an important part of our brand and messaging. And so buttery, like smooth as butter. Thank you, BTS and K-pop, for making that a thing, but we were first. And so like there's been a series of intentional decisions about being different as a principle for our brand, standing out, leveraging the mascot to help evangelize that brand and make it more relatable. In little things like taking on yellow as like a very strong brand color that you'll see on all of our employees, LinkedIn. We don't require it, but people, they just add this yellow background in their photos, and we've got social media assets so they can do that really easily on their cover photos and stuff. And then we also create, we call them butter emojis on our about page for every new employee. And it's so funny because one of the biggest things we hear in interviews is like, well, what, can I get one? Like, how does that work? Like the butter slices, as we call them, and butter emojis have become sort of like a very important cultural thing. So it's like tying all these things together was not necessarily in my background, but I do think thinking first principles about like, how do we stand out in the market? And also what is the core value proposition of what we're trying to do as a business? And aligning those two around the brand has resulted in something that I think I'm really proud of.
And we should say, if folks aren't watching the video version, you also have a butter yellow wall behind you.
I do.
Into the
That's true.
Mr. Butter pre-facelift on your shirt. So I have to compare and see what he's like after the facelift. Have you ever thought about having Paula Deen come speak at one of your company meetings?
We have a Paula Deen butter emoji, custom emoji in Slack. So that seems like a natural next step to have her do that. Yeah. That's great.
Hope you don't get a cease and desist for the sharing that you have that internal.
Yeah. It's internal, it's not for public.
It's internal. Yeah. You're not used for commerce.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about the way that you connect with your team to, build a culture, even though they're not in the office. Well, when you have a software product, your customers are never coming to your office. They're buying your software, your solution on the internet. They're using your service through the internet. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how have you learned from your customers to improve the product? What mechanisms have you put in place as you shifted from having, a few college students raising hundreds of dollars to now having millions of customers and, over $1 billion being raised? What's that look like?
Yeah, it's surprisingly similar. And it all comes down to the feedback loop. It's so important to tie someone's pain or experience back to actions that you're taking and then communicating that back to the customer. So in the early days, it was very simple. It was someone would write in. We had a tool we used called Intercom that was a chat bubble in the corner of every page. And whenever someone ran into an issue, they'd pop open that chat bubble and tell us about their problem. And sometimes they would say, hey, this feature is missing. I don't know where it is, because it was so early that they just expected it would be there. And I would be like, oh, you're right. It's down. It's currently under maintenance. And it was not under maintenance. We just hadn't launched it yet. And then later on, I would go back and build the thing and then launch it and say it's live now. And so, it was super scrappy, like really just taking feedback and then delivering, communicating back to customers. Now it's like we have 50,000 data points on features that customers want from those. They write in, they let us know. And we use a tool called Canny to aggregate all that feedback in one place. We make it public, so it's transparent around the upvotes that people have asked for, our progress updates on how they're going. And then when we launch something, they get notified. And I'd say it's like 50-50 or 75-25. We look at the data and we use it to make decisions, but at the same time, we're also looking at the future. What's next and what are customers not asking for that we can do to innovate on their behalf. And so it's never like 100% customer. This is like whatever's the top upvoted feature. That's it, and it's hard because you have to make real trade-offs. But it's so helpful because we have all this data that we've been collecting on what people are looking for, and then we use that to inform our roadmap, and then create this virtuous cycle of, hey, here's what we're working on, and here's how it's going, and let them know when it's launched. So it's been something we've iterated on, but also has surprisingly stayed very much the same, even at scale.
Transparency and the feedback loop are just some themes that, really you think about with your own team, with your customers. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think if you want to have success, whether you're selling, we're working with customers, or whether you're hiring people, with people who you are not sitting across a physical table from, those probably have to be essential ingredients for successful relationships in today's environment.
Definitely. It stems everything we do. It's like transparent pricing, transparent mission, transparent handbook, transparent product, roadmap. Transparency is not like a stated value, but it's something that's like a through line in everything we do. And I think it can be scary to be, I wouldn't say radically transparent, but I think it creates a ton of trust between all stakeholders. And I generally think defaulting to transparency is the right way to do most things.
Yeah, that's great. I guess when butter melts, it becomes transparent. So you can use time.
Yeah.
Um, I want to ask you, so Givebutter recently announced a $50 million investment from Bessemer Venture Partners Forge Group. And I wonder if you could just talk about what that investment means for the company.
So we were so thrilled to bring on Bessemer BVP Forge as a partner. And what it means for Givebutter is that we have the same mission, the same vision that they are believers in, with more resources to achieve them, and a platform in BVP that has backed some of the most iconic companies in the world. Shopify, Toast, LinkedIn, many others had early investments from this same investment group. And those are companies that I, from the earliest days of Givebutter, would look up to and listen to podcasts of the founders of and say, one day I hope that we're like, and to have the same fun, believe that Givebutter could be like them in the future is just so exciting. And when we started the company, we didn't raise capital for a number of years. So we bootstrapped the business and built everything in-house. And we made a decision to raise a $7 million seed round in 2022. We're very lucky to raise this round, and from an amazing set of investors. And it was a big decision because it was like, we're so just like, we're profitable, we're growing, and we're trying to thread that needle of sustainable growth and building a big and impactful business. And what's exciting about this investment from BVP Forge is that this fund has the same goal in mind, is sustainable growth. It's not burn capital and grow at all costs. It's how do we build a lasting, big and impactful business at scale. And so there's just a ton of alignment in our vision for Givebutter. And it's exciting because we have a lot of things in motion already that they're just saying, hey, let's put more fuel on the fire and go from 35,000 nonprofits to 350,000 nonprofits in the next 5 to 10 years. So it's going to be a fun couple of years and growing with them.
Wow, congratulations. That's a huge testament, and really incredible to see for somebody who remembers when you were, with your co-founders in a dorm room with a dream, creating this from scratch and raising money for Movember, and now seeing the impact that you've had and this the trust you're getting from these institutional investors to just continue to scale the impact that you're making. So we're really excited to hear about that. Just as we close, I just wanted to ask you, where do you get inspiration outside of the nonprofit sector and the startup sector for the work that you do? I mean, you've created really an aspirational, fun, incredible brand. You really resonate with your customer base and the nonprofit base. And I'm just wondering where else you get inspiration outside of those circles that you already operate in.
Yeah, so I got to mention my family, my wife, my loved ones, like give me so much inspiration and joy. But the place that I really go to when it's not looking for inspiration, but it's just been a theme in my life, is sports. I've always been a competitor. I played sports my whole life from a young age. And now that I live in Austin, Texas, there's a great pickup sports community. And I'm out at Zilker Park every Saturday and Sunday playing flag football. And it teaches me so many lessons. Like last week, I had a new team that I joined and I wanted to prove myself. And I'm a slot receiver and I go out for a pass on 4th down and then flunk. Ball hits off my hands, and it's frustrating and it's satisfying, and it's just such a interesting life is in so many ways, I think, reflective of the trials, tribulations, and the hard work that goes into sports. And I'm also such a lover of sports teams. I grew up as a Patriots fan. Hopefully people don't turn off this podcast immediately. But Tom Brady, and watching that I had a Bledsoe jersey. He got injured. Brady comes in. He's an underdog. And then the journey over 20 years of the amount of greatness he achieved, it's been so inspirational. I also aspire to do great things in my life, and it doesn't just happen overnight. It's been a theme in my life. Greatness is goodness times time. You gotta just do the good things consistently over time. And if you are in a book, you want people cheering you on because you're just doing those things, and there's a cause and effect to why that thing happened. And so I don't know, I go to sports a lot for inspiration, and both as a player and a watcher of sports, I find it to be has a lot of life lessons in it to draw inspiration from.
Well, now that Tom Brady's retired, I hope that you're keeping an eye on Patrick Mahomes, because I
Yes.
think there's a lot of leadership lessons there too, about a humble leader and other things, etc. But no, I think that's great to hear, and even hear about that. Sometimes the failures and some of those sports experiences, like when you didn't catch the ball the way you wanted to, and in that experience, and reminding you. So I think that's really smart. They say if you get, at least in the old days, if you had a bad injury from sports, you could rub some butter on it to make it
Is
feel
that
better.
right?
I don't know. I think I've heard.
Anthony, you're killing me with these sprinkling in these
I gotta
butter.
lead it. I gotta lean into your puns. So,
You're doing great. That's
well,
awesome.
Max, as somebody who used the Givebutter platform, it's awesome. I just love the brand. That's so fun, and that cuts through. But most of all, I just am really inspired by, your mission, and how you've developed a platform and really a whole kind of philosophy for how anybody can influence others to make the world a better place, and how organizations can make it fun for people to get involved with what they do. And it really starts at the inside with what you all do in the company. You shared about how, despite your team being all remote, you've put these foundational documents and systems in place so that everybody's pointed in the same direction, and they share the values and the guidelines, and how that extends out to the way you engage with your customers and partners, and that keeps everybody moving toward a bright future. So we are going to enjoy watching the continued rise of Givebutter. Wish I could find a good pun to put in there, but it's continuing to grow and expand. And I just want to say thank you for spending time with us today on Chief Influencer to tell us more about what you're up to.
Thank you, Anthony. Thanks for your support. Thank you to the many change makers out there doing the amazing work they do. The Givebutter team, my family, wouldn't be here without you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Chief Influencer, a production of Social Driver and the Communications Board. If you know a leader who should be featured as a Chief Influencer, please nominate them at chiefinfluencer.org. For show notes and more, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn. Until next time.